Today I'm going to be tearing up my analog pedal board. I've had the same design for over a year now, and so recently, with getting a few new pedals, I think it's time for a refresh. I'm going to tear it up, build it from the ground up, and along the way I'm going to be sharing some tips, some thoughts I have on just general signal flow, like pedal placement within your chain, pedal placement physically on the board, how I like things laid out to kind of not get in the way of each other while still being really compact. This is a pedal board I had actually used for a while I was touring and I had to fly a lot, so it's sized to fit as a personal item. It slides nicely under the seat on an airplane, sitting coach, and this is what I would use when I would travel to cruise ships when I was working those jobs for a while. The new pedals I got recently, I have an MXR licensed Timmy, so MXR licensed the design from Paul Cochran, and this is the much more affordable version. I've never played a Timmy before, but it sounds like something that I might like. It's kind of a transparent overdrive, to use that buzzword. I also recently got a hold of this version 1 El Capistan. They're great prices right now. These pedals normally would hold their value really well. They came out around $300 new, and even if you wanted to buy a used one, you'd still be spending like $275 or so. If you don't know, a few months ago Strymon came out with a version 2 of almost all of their pedals that are in this enclosure, and so you can actually get the version 1s really cheap now. There's a few upgrades, mainly like MIDI and some extra controls on the front. I didn't think I needed any of that, and I've always wanted to try an El Capistan, so I actually got this one, which is a little bit beat up, and I got a Strymon favorite switch for it, all for combined about $200, which is an amazing deal. So all I'm saying is, if you've always wanted a Strymon pedal, you've wanted to try one, but you didn't really want to fork out the cash for it, this is about as good a time as there's ever going to be to try out one of the older models. I also wanted to get the Fairfield Circuitry Shallow Water, which is a really nice like modulator lo-fi pedal back on the rig. I kind of missed it. And in addition to that, I just got a bunch of new EBS cables. This is what I use for building these rigs. So let's get into it. Coming at you from the future here. I just want to let you know as I edit this video, obviously it's a really long one. You notice that when you clicked on it. In all my videos, I always have the timestamps in the description, so if you're looking for a specific bit of information, you can find that, skip around, and yeah, I just want to honor your time, that's all. That soundtrack you listened to as I rebuilt the pedal board was recorded direct with the Vox Mystic Edge acting as the amp simulation. This is a tube-based overdrive pedal that can operate as an overdrive pedal, but also as a preamp to head into the effects return of just about any amplifier that you have that has an effects loop. I tend to leave a Fender Tweed at a venue that I'm at every single week, and every now and then I feel like I want an AC30 kind of vibe instead of the Fender Tweed preamp. So I'll just switch that to preamp mode, plug straight into the effects return, and all of a sudden it sounds a little bit more like an AC30. It also operates with cab simulation, which is what you were listening to. So that is a great analog pedal, a fantastic way to go direct without having to go into the digital realm if you don't want to. I spent a lot of time building and tearing apart and rebuilding pedal boards over the years, and believe it or not, there's a certain brand that I've kind of settled on for each of the different products that I like to use to keep things all nice and tidy. So if you're thinking of rebuilding your pedal board maybe, or maybe you're just starting, or maybe you just want to clean up what you already have, check out the links in the description. Those are the ones that I've settled on that I think work the best. So it's a few days later. I got to test out this pedal board over the weekend over a few concerts with the Pittsburgh Symphony. It was my first time performing with them. Originally, I was thinking I was going to take my Helix rig, but they actually wanted me to have a live amp since they were putting the entire rhythm section in what I call the penalty box. Typically, when I play with orchestras, we're all surrounded with plexiglass. The bassist, guitarist, drum set player. Sometimes the pianist is in there as well, as was the case this time. And it worked out really well. I was thinking I was going to use my Helix rig, but since they wanted the live amp, I took this pedal board and the Mesa Boogie, and I played my Fano TC6, which is my main guitar right now. It is a Telecaster style instrument, basically with TV Jones Supertron pickups, so it's very bright. All right, so I'm going to run through the pedal chain right now, the signal path, just to give you an idea of what everything is. And as we go through, I'm just going to discuss a little bit about why I have the pedals in the exact order that they're in and what my thinking is and stuff like that. So it comes out of the guitar and into the input of the pedal board. Obviously, I'm using these locking jacks just to ensure that if a pedal gets pulled on or stepped on or otherwise, something that would yank it out normally, it's not actually going to come out of the pedal board and cut the signal. This is pretty easy to do. You just install them to the side of your board. I'm going to have them linked in the description as well as everything else in this video. This channel, most of the videos in this channel are educational in nature, and so this is how I earn a little bit of income. If you purchase through any of those links, I'll get a small commission, and that just goes to help fund the channel and the time, which is, for this video, probably about 8 hours that I've spent doing this. So we head to the input of the pedal board. First pedal in the chain is the Polytune 2 Mini. Most tuners nowadays have a buffer on the input of it. I've been thinking about switching to the Polytune 3 because it has that buffer, and that's just a great way to ensure that you're staying with a relatively low impedance signal and your signal's clean before it heads on to the rest of the pedals. So in the future, I might switch to the Polytune 3 for that reason, but in general, you want the tuner first because it wants to see a clean signal so it can work the best as possible. Out of the Polytune 2, we go to the MXR Phase 90. I like having my phasers before overdrives. If you try it afterwards, you're going to find that there's some fake high-end information, some really bright stuff like 12K frequencies and above that pop out with phasers after overdrive. So for that reason, Eddie Van Halen did it, so this is the way I do it. Keep the phaser before the overdrives. Out of the phaser, I head to the compressor first. I like having compressors before overdrives because it smooths out the transients and gives you a really huge sustaining sound. Let's check this out, actually. So that's the compressor just by itself right now. Here's the overdrive, the first overdrive, which is right after the compressor here, the MXR Timmy. Now all together, the compressor and the overdrive, you'll hear what I'm talking about. So for that reason, that's why I like to have the compressor in front of the overdrive. It cuts down the attack and feeds like a really smooth signal into the overdrive, where the overdrive is applying its own sustain. You get this beautiful, long, like lead guitar type sustaining tone. If you do it the other way around, the compressor doesn't really have much to do because the overdrive is already clamping down on the transients, the attack of the note, right? So I prefer the compressor in front of the overdrive. So again, it's tuner, phaser, compressor. The MXR Timmy is my first overdrive, which is, this was actually the first time I was using it. It was a brand new pedal when I built this board. And then finally into the Vox Mystic Edge, which is able to operate in a few different ways. And this is one of my favorite pedals. And for this reason, I love having it on the board. The clips you heard earlier were actually recorded direct. So I don't know if you can see this on the other camera, but there's a switch up top here that switches between a few different modes. You can actually go from standard operation, where it's going to operate as an overdrive pedal, which is exactly how I'm using it with this amp right now. You can switch it to preamp mode to head into the effects return of an amplifier. And lastly, which is how I recorded earlier in stereo, I had it on cabinet simulation mode, which is where it applies an analog EQ to make it seem like there's a cabinet involved here. So essentially this is an analog amp simulator. This is a tube-based pedal. It's not solid state, and it uses Korg's new tube technology. So it still runs on just a 9-volt supply. You can put a battery in this. That battery will die in about 2 hours. It uses a lot of current to get it up to the voltage required to use that small tube, but it has a really great sound, and this is one of my favorite overdrive pedals. So with the Mystic Edge off, so typically the Mystic Edge works as my kind of like medium gain stage, and I'll use that for my rhythm parts. If I want to use it with for a lead guitar sound, I'll add the compressor in front of it. The Timmy is kind of like my light gain stage, so by itself, this is how it sounds. And if I want like a really heavy gain sound, at least for my style of guitar playing, I'll combine these two. So that's kind of my overdrive stages. Sometimes I'll use the second channel on the amp. So in previous pedalboard builds, I actually have a little switcher that I use to switch the reverb on and off and switch between channels 1 and 2 on that amp. I didn't have room for it, but typically that's where this other jack on the side would come in. That's where I would plug in for that type of control. All right, so out of the Mystic Edge, it goes into the volume pedal. I definitely prefer, especially for the situation I was in over the weekend, having my volume pedal after the Mystic Edge. So if you think about it, you've already got a volume knob right here. There's no point to having your primary volume pedal that you're going to use on your pedal board before your overdrive. So if you want to use an overdrive and just kind of get a little bit less out of it, you can just roll back on your guitar volume. But if you're ever in a situation that you need like a heavier gain sound, just at a lower volume, you won't be able to achieve that with a volume pedal or a volume knob pre-overdrive. And that's why you actually want to have one afterwards, in my opinion. So here's full volume. And if I need to roll back, then I just kind of attenuate the signal. So think about this volume pedal kind of as a master volume here. We've got our main overdrives and then the master volume to attenuate it, so you can still dig in and get a really intense overdriven sound, just at a lower volume if you need to. So out of the volume pedal, this is where it goes to the effects loop or the insert of the pedal board. And as I was using it this weekend, I was just going into the front end of the amp. I didn't feel like I needed to use the effects loop at all. I actually have a few of these that I keep handy. So this is a TRS connector where I've soldered the tip and the ring to each other. So basically, if I'm not using the effects loop, I just put this into the effects loop section here, and it'll continue the signal. If I didn't have anything attached, you wouldn't be getting any sound out of the pedal board. So if I want to use this pedal board with an amp that doesn't have an effects loop, or rather if I'm using this amp as I was earlier, and I don't want to use the effects loop of it, I just throw this guy in here and it keeps the signal going. So if I did want to use the effects loop, here's how it works. Basically, I'm using a TRS-Y cable to get, it's basically the send of the signal heading to the tip of this jack. It sends to the front end of the amplifier. Out of the effects end of the amplifier, it returns on the ring here, and then I use a TRS-Y cable in the pedal board to take that ring signal and keep it going through the rest of the board. Eventually, it comes out here through the main output, and this will go into the effects return. If I wanted to use the amp just into the front end, it's real simple. Again, I throw this in, plug into the front of the pedal board, have this in the effects loop to keep the signal going, and then it comes out of the output and just goes into the front end of an amplifier like you would normally. Something else that's nice about that insert that I built in there is that if I just need like a bone stock, you know, typical 80s chorus sound or tremolo sound or anything else that I don't have access to on that board, I just bring along another pedal, I power it with a battery, and it can just plug into that same spot as the effects loop would normally go. So after the effects loop, this is where we get into the wet effects part of the rig. The first thing it hits is the Walrus Audio Slo. And in my opinion, it's really important to have your volume pedal post overdrives, but pre wet effects like reverb and delay. So that allows you to swell in like that, and then you hear the reverb kind of decay there. It's a really great pedal. You can get a lot of different sounds out of it. It's a very ambient, long-form type of reverb, and it actually has this sweet sustain function, which I use a ton sometimes. If we're starting a song, I'll just put a pad in there just to kind of make it sound like there's an extra instrument, give the band a little bit of a bigger sound. Kind of replaces what a synth would normally do. So I'll usually play the root and the fifth of whatever key that we're in. If we're in the key of G, that means I'm playing a D and a G here. It's kind of in that range of the guitar. And it just sits there in the background. And if I want to turn it off, I just hit the sustain again. So that's my kind of ambient reverb. So out of the Walrus Slo, it heads into the Fairfield Circuitry Shallow Water, which I just called a lo-fi modulator. It has a lot of different ways that you can use it. Here's just kind of a generic chorus sound if you wanted that. If you turn down this damp control, kind of becomes a little bit more extreme. So I like to leave that up a little bit. If you turn the mix all the way to the right, it's going to be a little bit more like a vibrato. But you can hear there's some high-end attenuation happening here, so that's what this control is for. And I really like having this after at least one reverb, so I can get a modulated reverb sound if I wanted to. And one of the nice things about this pedal is that it can also double as a boost. So if I wanted to get rid of all the modulation, I would just turn the mix down, and then I can use the volume control here to set my boost. So straight up and down, it's at unity. I can boost or cut if I wanted to. Typically, I only used boosts in a very large ensemble. I had one solo from this orchestra gig, and so I used this to boost myself up a little bit over the orchestra. Typically, though, I don't use boost pedals because most of the bands that I play with, they come down in volume for me for my solo, but it's nice to have this just for another reason if I need a boost. So out of the shallow water, it heads to the Strymon El Capistan, which is a tape-style delay. So the way I use this delay is in live mode, so without the favorite switch. This is where the knobs are doing exactly where they're set. I have live mode set up for a tapped delay sound, so this is like a U2, like the Edge sort of delay sound where it's, you know, the repeats and everything is very integral to the sound of the music, the part of the guitar part that you're playing. So mode A is going to be set up with a 16th note subdivision. Add a little bit. Mode B is going to be a dotted quarter note. Mode C is going to be a quarter note delay. And then with the favorite switch turned on, this is just going to be a generic kind of solo sound. which in my experience is a little bit low on the mix, more repeats, and a delay that's somewhere usually between like 300 and 500 milliseconds. Out of the Strymon El Capistan into the Blue Sky, as you heard earlier, I just kind of have this usually as an always-on reverb, just kind of softly in the background. I really like the plate sound on this. Let's crank that up so you can hear it. This was one of the first pedals that one of the first really nice pedals that I've ever bought. I got this, I think, in 2014, so I've had this a real long time, and it's been on my board pretty much every time I've redesigned it. I just can't get rid of it. It's got a beautiful sound to it. So I like the plate sound. The room also sounds great on a lower setting, lower decay setting. It's going to be like a small room. And as you boost it past 12 o'clock, noon, it's going to be a little bit more like a concert hall. Just a ton of controls. You can get all the reverb sounds you need out of this. You can have a modulated room sound if you wanted. You could make a shimmer. Typically you want a really long decay on that, a higher pre-delay for that sound. We also have a spring verb, which as far as digital spring algorithms go, this is one of the best ones there is. And I also have a favorite switch saved here that I haven't changed in probably about since the time that I got it. It's just a modulated hall verb. So that's, and of course I shouldn't forget, the Altoids tin is just where I keep my guitar picks. It's nice to have right there. I also have a set of earplugs because sometimes you get to a gig, you realize it's a lot louder than you thought, and your guitar case might be side stage or in some other room. So I have a set of earplugs here just so I can always, get to a pair. It's always within arm's reach. The other thing I wanted to mention, just because I get a comment, I get a question every single time, what I used to hold this pedal board up for videos is a Samsung laptop stand. I'm going to link it down there. It's really sturdy. It's advertised for laptops, but it can support something that's much heavier. This board's probably, 15, 20 pounds. So it's sturdy. It's not going anywhere. And it's a great tool to use when you're dialing in sounds or just recording at home and, you want it within arm's reach instead of, bending down each time you have to make a change. So if you have any questions about this pedal board, just leave a comment down below. I'm pretty good at getting back to people. If you made it this far in the video, thanks for watching. I hope it was educational or entertaining in some fashion. I have a ton of videos on this channel. I think I'm close to 400 now. Videos like this, just kind of geared towards talking about the guitar. There's gear demos, reviews, and stuff like that, especially a ton of videos centered on guitar pedals and acoustic guitar stuff too, strings, pickups, and whatnot. I have a whole series of playlists you can find in the description. If you have a specific question you were wondering about or want to get in contact with me, I also give lessons. You can find that info on my website. Take care. Thanks again for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.